The Screaming Room. It was a cold December evening in the small town of Elmwood, Ohio. The air carried an unusual chill even for this time of year. Families were gathered around their fireplaces, unaware of the events unfolding just outside the city limits. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? James Carter, a 35-year-old mechanic, lived alone in a century-old farmhouse on the outskirts of town. His wife had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving him to care for their property by himself. The house, though charming, had always given James an uneasy feeling, especially one particular room on the second floor. That night, as James finished repairing his truck in the garage, he noticed something strange. A faint sound, almost like whispering, seemed to be coming from upstairs. He glanced at the clock. 9:17 p.m. Too late for visitors, and definitely too late for his imagination to play tricks on him. Climbing the creaky wooden stairs, James felt the temperature drop noticeably. By the time he reached the second floor, his breath had become visible in the frigid air. The sound grew louder, more distinct now. It wasn't whispering anymore, it was screaming. The source came from the west wing of the house, a part of the building rarely used. Specifically, the Red Room, so named because its walls were painted a deep crimson that seemed to glow faintly in low light. James hesitated outside the closed door. The screams continued, echoing through the hallway. Taking a deep breath, James turned the brass doorknob. The door opened with a slow creak, revealing a scene that would haunt him forever. The room was empty, yet the screaming filled the space with an intensity that defied logic. James's heart pounded as he stepped inside. The wallpaper, faded but still recognizable as Victorian floral patterns, seemed to shift and move in the dim light. Shadows danced across the walls, though no source of movement could be seen. The temperature dropped further, causing James to shiver uncontrollably. He checked his watch. 9:23 p.m. Time seemed to stretch and warp within the confines of the room. The screams changed pitch, becoming more desperate, more human-like. Yet there was no one there, just the empty space and the overwhelming sense of dread. James remembered hearing stories about the previous owners of the house, a family who had lived there in the early 1900s. Rumors spoke of mysterious disappearances and unexplained deaths, but these were just tales, weren't they? Urban legends meant to entertain rather than terrify. As he stood frozen in the center of the room, the screams began to form words. At first, they were indistinct, jumbled sounds, but gradually, they became clearer. "Help me! Get out! They're coming!" Each phrase sent a new wave of fear through James's body. His phone, left charging downstairs, buzzed with a text message from his friend Mark. "Hey, you still up?" the message read. James considered responding, but the phone remained safely downstairs while he was trapped in this nightmare. The buzzing stopped as quickly as it started. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching into eternity. 9:28 p.m. The room's atmosphere shifted again, becoming heavier, more oppressive. James's breathing quickened as he realized the screaming had stopped. Complete silence filled the space, more terrifying than the noise had been. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Not the overhead bulb, which had long since burned out, but the very air itself seemed to shimmer and pulse with an otherworldly energy. Shadows detached themselves from the walls, taking on forms that defied description. Shapes that twisted and writhed in ways that shouldn't be possible. James backed toward the door, his movements slow and deliberate. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to cooperate. The temperature continued to plummet, frost forming on the window panes despite the lack of cold air entering the room. At 9:34 p.m., the door slammed shut behind him. The sound reverberated through the house, shaking the very foundations. James spun around, panic rising in his chest. The handle wouldn't budge, no matter how hard he pulled or pushed. The room had sealed itself off from the rest of the world. The shapes in the corners of the room began to move closer. Their forms solidified into something resembling human figures. But not quite. Eyes glowed with an unnatural light, mouths stretched impossibly wide. Whispers filled the air once more, surrounding James on all sides. "Who are you?" James demanded, his voice trembling despite his attempt to sound authoritative. The whispers responded, though no actual words could be discerned. Instead, they formed a cacophony of sound that threatened to overwhelm his senses. Time lost all meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, or perhaps it was only seconds. James couldn't tell anymore. His watch had stopped functioning, the hands frozen at 9:36 p.m. The room seemed to expand and contract, changing size and shape with each passing moment. Then, without warning, everything went silent. The shadows retreated to the corners, the temperature returned to normal, and the door opened easily when James turned the handle. Stepping out into the hallway, he found nothing unusual waiting for him. The rest of the house remained calm and quiet. But the experience had changed James. He couldn't sleep in that house anymore. Within a week, he had sold the property and moved to another state. To this day, the current owners refuse to enter the Red Room. They've boarded it up, sealing it off from the rest of the house. Sometimes, late at night, people walking past the old farmhouse claim to hear screams coming from within, though no one dares to investigate. The legend of the Screaming Room lives on, whispered among the residents of Elmwood. A reminder that some places are best left undisturbed. The story ends where it began, with a cold December evening in Ohio. But now, whenever someone hears an unexpected sound in the night, they think twice before investigating. Because sometimes, the truth is far more terrifying than any urban legend. Pause here for reflection. Let the weight of the tale settle in the listener's mind. The final word lingers in the air, fading slowly into silence. He wasn't on the guest list. It was a chilly October evening in rural Vermont, where the small town of Willow Creek prepared for its annual autumn festival. The leaves had turned into fiery shades of red and orange, carpeting the ground beneath towering maple trees. The air carried the faint scent of wood smoke mingled with pumpkin spice, creating an atmosphere both cozy and mysterious. Rachel Thompson, a local schoolteacher in her early 30s, had volunteered to help organize this year's event. She stood near the entrance of the community center, clutching a clipboard filled with names and details. The golden hour light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the parking lot as families began arriving for the festivities. "Good evening, Mrs. Peterson." Rachel greeted a familiar face, checking off another name from her meticulously organized list. "Your grandchildren must be excited about the haunted house tour tonight." As the line of visitors grew longer, Rachel noticed a tall figure standing silently at the edge of the parking lot. He wore a dark overcoat that seemed out of place in the crisp but not freezing weather. His presence felt different, though she couldn't quite articulate why. Perhaps it was the way he remained motionless while everyone else bustled about, or how his gaze seemed fixed directly on her despite the distance. "Excuse me," came a voice behind her, startling Rachel from her thoughts. She turned to assist another family, but when she glanced back toward the parking lot moments later, the man was gone. Shaking off an inexplicable feeling of unease, she returned to her duties. The festival proceeded smoothly throughout the evening. Children laughed as they navigated the hay maze, couples strolled hand in hand through the pumpkin patch, and elderly residents shared stories around the bonfire. Yet Rachel couldn't shake the image of that strange man from her mind. Several times, she caught herself scanning the crowd, searching for his distinctive silhouette. Around 9 o'clock, as the last scheduled events drew to a close, Rachel began directing volunteers in the cleanup process. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and a thin mist crept across the grounds, swirling around lampposts and benches. Most attendees had already departed, leaving only a few stragglers enjoying the final moments of the celebration. "Rachel," called Mark Harrison, one of the event coordinators, "have you seen anyone still wandering around?" I thought I heard footsteps near the old storage shed. A chill ran down Rachel's spine that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. No, everyone should be accounted for by now. She hesitated, then added, but earlier, there was this man. I never saw him approach the registration table. Mark frowned, adjusting his flashlight beam. That's odd. Let's do a quick sweep of the area before we lock up. Better safe than sorry. They split up to cover more ground, agreeing to meet back at the main entrance in 15 minutes. As Rachel made her way past the deserted food stalls and silent game booths, she couldn't help but notice how different everything looked under the dim security lights. Shadows danced eerily along the building's walls, and every rustle of leaves sounded like approaching footsteps. Suddenly, she froze. There, near the edge of the woods, stood the man in the dark overcoat again. This time, he wasn't merely observing, he was watching her intently, his expression unreadable in the poor lighting. Her heart pounded against her ribcage as she tried to recall if she'd ever seen him before in town, but something about him felt wrong. "Hello?" she called out tentatively, taking a cautious step forward. "Can I help you with something?" Instead of responding, the man tilted his head slightly, almost like a curious animal studying its surroundings. Then, without warning, he turned and disappeared into the tree line. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She knew she should alert Mark immediately, but curiosity propelled her forward instead. Maybe she could catch up to him and ask what he wanted. The forest path leading away from the festival grounds felt impossibly darker than it should have been. Moonlight struggled to penetrate the dense canopy above, and Rachel found herself relying heavily on her phone's flashlight app. Twigs snapped underfoot, and the occasional owl hooted in the distance, heightening her sense of isolation. After walking for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably much less, she emerged into a small clearing. And there, standing perfectly still amidst the encroaching darkness, was the man once more. Up close, she realized his features were remarkably ordinary. Brown hair, average build, plain face, yet somehow profoundly unsettling. His eyes reflected her phone's light in an unnatural way, almost glowing. "You shouldn't be here," Rachel managed to say, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound authoritative. "This is private property." For the first time he spoke, his voice low and measured. "I'm looking for someone. They told me I'd find answers here." "What kind of answers?" she pressed, inching backwards slowly. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. "Who are you looking for?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a photograph. Even from several feet away, Rachel recognized the faded image instantly. It showed a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to herself. Same hair color, similar facial structure. Only the style of clothing suggested it was taken decades ago. "My sister," he said finally, his tone heavy with sorrow. "She went missing after attending one of these festivals." "That was," he paused, calculating, 52 years ago tonight. Rachel's blood ran cold. She remembered hearing vague rumors about a disappearance connected to the autumn festival, but no one ever talked about it openly. Local legends hinted at supernatural occurrences tied to the land itself, stories passed down through generations but rarely believed. Could this man truly be searching for closure after all these years? Before she could respond, a sudden gust of wind extinguished her phone's screen, plunging them both into near-total darkness. Panic surged through her veins as she fumbled to reactivate the device. When the light finally flickered back on, the man was gone. Not just stepped aside or hidden, completely vanished, as if he'd never existed. Shaken to her core, Rachel stumbled back toward the festival grounds, calling Mark's name repeatedly. Together, they searched the entire area again, finding no trace of the mysterious visitor. Later, while reviewing security footage from multiple angles, they discovered something even more disturbing. Not a single camera had captured any sign of the man in the dark overcoat. It was as though he'd slipped between the cracks of reality itself. In the weeks that followed, Rachel found herself unable to forget those haunting eyes or the photograph that seemed to bridge past and present. She began researching local history archives, determined to uncover the truth about the missing woman. What she learned chilled her to the bone. Numerous unexplained disappearances linked to the festival site over the past century. Each case involved a solitary individual vanishing without a trace during the annual celebration. None were ever solved. Despite warnings from friends and colleagues to let sleeping dogs lie, Rachel continued her investigation. Something about the man's desperate search resonated deeply within her. Perhaps it was survivor's guilt, or maybe a subconscious recognition of shared pain. Whatever the reason, she felt compelled to seek answers, no matter where the trail might lead. One moonless night, armed with flashlights and determination, Rachel and Mark ventured back to the clearing where she'd last seen the stranger. The air felt heavier than usual, charged with an almost electric tension. Leaves whispered secrets as they crunched underfoot, and shadows danced unpredictably despite the steady beams of their lights. "Do you really think we'll find anything?" Mark asked skeptically, though his grip on the flashlight betrayed underlying nerves. "This whole situation feels off." "I don't know," Rachel admitted softly, scanning the perimeter for any signs of disturbance. "But I can't shake the feeling that we're missing something important, something right under our noses." They spent nearly an hour combing the area, finding nothing but ancient tree roots and scattered stones. Just as frustration began to set in, Mark spotted something glinting faintly among the foliage. Kneeling down, he unearthed a tarnished silver locket half buried in the dirt. Inside lay two tiny photographs, one of the woman from the original picture, smiling brightly, and another of a younger version of the man in the dark overcoat, his arms slung casually around her shoulders. "Oh my God," Rachel breathed, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "This has to belong to her, to his sister." Without warning, the temperature plummeted dramatically, causing both of them to shiver violently. Their flashlights flickered erratically, threatening to die altogether. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, seeming to emanate from the very earth beneath their feet. And then, emerging from the shadows like a specter materializing from smoke, stood the man once more. His expression hadn't changed, but his presence felt different somehow, more solid yet simultaneously ethereal. He extended a hand toward Rachel, palm upturned expectantly. In that moment, she understood what he wanted, needed from her. Placing the locket gently into his grasp, she whispered, "I'm so sorry. We'll keep looking. I promise." For the first time since their encounter, emotion flickered across his face, gratitude mixed with profound sadness. Slowly, deliberately, he closed his fingers around the precious keepsake. As he did so, his form began to dissolve, fading away like morning mist beneath the rising sun. Within seconds, he was gone, leaving behind only silence and the lingering scent of autumn leaves. Back in Willow Creek, Rachel dedicated herself to preserving the memory of those lost souls whose stories had been forgotten by time. She worked tirelessly to ensure proper memorials were established and historical records updated accurately. Though she never encountered the man in the dark overcoat again, she often sensed his presence during quiet moments, a gentle reminder that some mysteries transcend human understanding, existing beyond the veil of our everyday lives. Every October, as the festival preparations begin anew, Rachel finds herself drawn to that secluded clearing deep within the woods. There, surrounded by whispering trees and dancing shadows, she leaves fresh flowers and a handwritten note promising continued vigilance. Because sometimes, justice isn't about solving a case or finding definitive answers. Sometimes, it's about honoring the memories of those who came before us, ensuring their voices aren't silenced forever by the passage of time. And perhaps, just perhaps, somewhere beyond our comprehension, a brother and sister are finally reunited, free from the burdens of unanswered questions and unresolved grief. Their spirits rest peacefully now, knowing that someone cared enough to remember. Voices in the cornfield, a haunting tale. It was a quiet, humid evening in late September when Emma first heard the whispers. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the endless rows of cornfields that surrounded her small town of Millbrook, Illinois. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and drying leaves, and a gentle breeze rustled through the towering stalks. She had always found the fields comforting during the day, their golden waves stretching as far as the eye could see. But at night, they felt different, oppressive, as if the darkness between the rows hid secrets too terrible to be spoken aloud. Emma stood on the edge of the field, hesitating for a moment before stepping forward. Her boots crunched softly against the dry soil beneath her feet. It was almost 8 o'clock, and she should have been home by now, but something had drawn her here, nagging curiosity she couldn't quite explain. Earlier that afternoon, while walking back from the general store, she'd overheard an old man muttering about strange voices coming from the cornfield. He claimed he'd heard them every night for weeks, soft murmurs carried on the wind like ghostly echoes. Most people dismissed his words as nonsense, attributing it to his age or perhaps too many years spent working under the scorching sun. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there might be truth to what he said. The moon hung low in the sky, its pale light filtering weakly through the dense canopy above. Shadows danced around her, shifting unpredictably as though alive. She took another cautious step deeper into the field, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hello?" she called out tentatively, her voice barely audible even to herself. Silence greeted her, save for the faint rustling of leaves overhead. She exhaled slowly, trying to calm her nerves. Maybe this was all just her imagination playing tricks on her after hearing the old man's story. But then, faintly, she heard it all whisper. Barely more than a breath, yet unmistakable. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once, weaving through the rows of corn like a phantom thread. Emma froze, her pulse quickening. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice firmer this time, though laced with unease. Again, the whisper came, louder now, closer. She turned sharply, scanning the darkened rows around her, but saw nothing except the endless maze of stalks swaying gently in the breeze. "Leave me alone!" she shouted, panic beginning to creep into her tone. The whispers grew louder still, overlapping each other until they formed a cacophony of unintelligible murmurs. They weren't human voices, not entirely. There was something wrong about them, something unnatural. A chill ran down her spine as she realized she wasn't alone. Something or someone was watching her from within the shadows. She stumbled backward, her foot catching on a root hidden beneath the dirt. With a startled cry, she fell hard onto the ground, pain shooting up her arm as she landed awkwardly. For a moment, everything went silent again. Too silent. Even the rustling of the leaves seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of her own ragged breathing. Then, without warning, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was tall, impossibly so, its silhouette blending seamlessly with the surrounding stalks. Its facif, it could even be called, that was obscured by a tangle of vines and dried husks, giving it the appearance of some grotesque scarecrow brought to life. Yet it moved with purpose, taking deliberate steps toward her. Emma scrambled to her feet, her mind screaming at her to run, but her legs refused to obey. She was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. "You shouldn't have come here," the figure rasped, its voice a guttural blend of multiple tones layered atop one another. It sounded neither male nor female, neither young nor old, just wrong. "This place doesn't belong to you." "What do you want?" Emma managed to choke out, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to look away, to close her eyes and pretend none of this was real, but she couldn't. The figure's gaze held her captive, piercing through her very soul. "The voices will tell you," it replied cryptically, tilting its head in a way that made her stomach churn. Before she could respond, it raised a gnarled hand and pointed deeper into the field. Against her will, Emma found herself turning to follow its gesture. There, nestled among the rows of corn, was a clearing she hadn't noticed before. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone altar, its surface stained with dark streaks that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Surrounding the altar were dozens of crude effigies fashioned from twisted branches and scraps of fabric, their hollow eyes seeming to stare directly at her. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it began to chant in a language she didn't recognize, the syllables rolling off its tongue in a rhythmic cadence that sent shivers coursing through her body. The whispers returned, louder now, drowning out the sound of the chanting. They pressed in on her from all sides, filling her ears and clouding her thoughts until she could no longer distinguish reality from nightmare. Images flashed before her eyes' faces, contorted in agony, bodies writhing in pain, screams echoing endlessly. She clutched her head, desperate to block out the visions, but they only grew stronger. Through the chaos, one word repeated itself over and over again: reap, 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 reap. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The whispers ceased, the visions vanished, the figure was gone. Emma collapsed to her knees, gasping for air as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. When she finally mustered the strength to stand, she stumbled out of the field and ran all the way back to town, not stopping until she reached the safety of her home. For days afterward, Emma avoided the cornfield at all costs. She told no one what she had seen, fearing they wouldn't believe her, or worse, that they would think she was crazy. But the memories lingered, haunting her dreams and leaving her perpetually on edge. She started hearing the whispers again, faint at first, but growing louder with each passing night. No matter where she went, they followed her, taunting her with fragmented phrases she couldn't fully understand. One evening, unable to endure the torment any longer, Emma decided to confront the source of the voices once and for all. Armed with a flashlight and a pocket knife, she returned to the field, determined to uncover the truth. The moonlight illuminated her path as she navigated the labyrinthine rows, her footsteps hesitant yet resolute. When she reached the clearing, she found the altar exactly as she remembered it, but this time, it wasn't empty. Lying atop the stone slab was a book bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed with age. Etched into the cover were symbols unlike anything she had ever seen, intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when viewed from certain angles. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, half expecting it to burn her skin or crumble to dust in her grasp. But it remained solid, heavy with secrets waiting to be uncovered. As she flipped through the pages, she discovered writings detailing rituals meant to summon entities from beyond the veil. Each entry described increasingly sinister ceremonies, culminating in a final passage written in bold, jagged handwriting: "To reap is to feed is to grow. To grow is to consume." Beneath the text was a drawing of the same figure she had encountered in the field, standing beside the altar with arms outstretched. A cold realization washed over her. This wasn't just some isolated haunting, it was a cycle, a ritual perpetuated by forces far older than humanity itself. And somehow, she had become entangled in it. Before she could process further, a familiar voice echoed behind her. "You've seen enough." She spun around to find the figure standing mere feet away, its presence radiating malice. This time, however, she didn't freeze. Summoning every ounce of courage she possessed, she lunged forward, driving the pocket knife into its chest, or rather, where its chest should have been. The blade passed harmlessly through the air, leaving the figure unharmed. "You cannot kill what does not live," it sneered, reaching out to grab her wrist. Pain shot through her arm as its grip tightened, forcing her to drop the knife. "But you can join us." "No!" she screamed, thrashing wildly in its grasp. Desperation fueled her movements, and she managed to break free, stumbling backward toward the edge of the clearing. Without thinking, she hurled the book into the air, watching as it landed squarely on the altar. Sparks erupted from the pages, igniting a fire that spread rapidly across the dry wood. The figure let out an unearthly shriek, its form flickering like a dying flame. "You don't know what you've done!" it roared, dissolving into smoke as the flames consumed the altar. Within moments, the entire clearing was ablaze, the heat searing her skin as she fled back toward the safety of the town. When she emerged from the field, coughing and covered in soot, she expected to feel relief. Instead, she felt emptiness, a void left behind by whatever force had been unleashed. The whispers were gone, replaced by an oppressive silence that weighed heavily on her shoulders. She knew deep down that destroying the altar hadn't ended the cycle, it had merely delayed it. Years later, residents of Millbrook would speak in hushed tones about the night the cornfield burned. Some claimed they saw shapes moving among the ashes, their forms indistinct yet undeniably present. Others reported hearing faint murmurs carried on the wind, though no one dared investigate further. As for Emma, she left town soon after, unable to bear the weight of what she had witnessed. But wherever she went, the memory of those voices followed her, a reminder that some secrets are best left buried. The last passenger never got off. It was a cold, damp night in the small town of Millbrook, nestled deep within the woods of upstate New York. The air carried an eerie stillness, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves and the distant hum of crickets. Somewhere near the edge of the forest, the old train station stood abandoned, its wooden structure warped and weathered by time. Paint peeled off the sign that once proudly announced Millbrook Station, now barely legible under layers of grime and neglect. Few people ventured here anymore, except for curious teenagers daring each other to explore its haunted history, or so the rumors went. On this particular evening, a group of 5 friends decided to visit the station as part of their weekend adventure. They had heard tales about strange occurrences at the sight whispers of passengers who never disembarked from the final train to pass through decades ago. None of them truly believed in ghosts, but the thrill of trespassing on forbidden ground was too tempting to resist. Among them were Emma, a skeptic with a sharp tongue; Daniel, her boyfriend, who loved anything supernatural; Mia, the quiet one who always seemed lost in thought; Jake, the joker whose laughter could fill even the darkest spaces; and Olivia, the cautious one who often served as the voice of reason. They arrived just after sunset, parking their car a mile away to avoid drawing attention. The walk to the station felt longer than expected, the path illuminated only by the dim glow of their flashlights. Shadows danced along the trees, creating shapes that looked almost human if you squinted hard enough. As they approached the station, the atmosphere grew heavier, as though the very air resisted their presence. "This place gives me the creeps," Olivia muttered, clutching her flashlight tightly. "Are we sure this is safe?" "Oh, come on," Daniel replied, his tone teasing yet reassuring. "What's the worst that could happen? A ghost shows up and asks us to leave?" He chuckled nervously, though no one else joined in. Emma rolled her eyes. "Let's just get this over with. I want to see what all the fuss is about." Inside the station, the floorboards creaked beneath their feet, protesting every step they took. Dust coated every surface, and the scent of mildew filled the air. Graffiti covered the walls, crude messages scrawled by those who sought to leave their mark on the forgotten building. But something else caught their attention, a series of faded photographs pinned to a bulletin board near the ticket counter. Most were black and white images of smiling families, boarding trains, snapshots of happier times. However, one photo stood out among the rest. It depicted a lone figure standing on the platform, face obscured by shadows despite the bright sunlight behind them. "Who do you think that is?" Mia asked softly, pointing to the mysterious figure. No one answered immediately. Instead, they stared at the image, feeling an inexplicable chill run down their spines. Jake broke the silence with a forced laugh. Probably just some weirdo who didn't want to smile for the camera. But his attempt at humor did little to ease the tension. The longer they lingered, the more unsettling the station became. Strange noises echoed through the empty hall-soft footsteps, faint whispers, the occasional groan of metal shifting somewhere unseen. At first, they dismissed these sounds as tricks of the mind, products of their overactive imaginations fueled by fear. Yet as the minutes passed, the disturbances grew louder, more distinct. "Did you hear that?" Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. She pointed toward a set of double doors leading to the tracks outside. Everyone froze, listening intently. Sure enough, there it was again, a low, rhythmic clanging, like the sound of a bell being struck repeatedly. "That's not coming from inside," Daniel said, frowning. "It's coming from the platform." Against better judgment, they followed the noise, stepping cautiously onto the weathered wooden planks of the platform. The clanging stopped abruptly as they emerged, leaving only the oppressive silence of the night. Their flashlights scanned the area, revealing nothing out of the ordinary. Just empty tracks stretching into the darkness, surrounded by dense woods. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. Not the natural kind caused by faulty wiring or stormy skies, but a deliberate pulsing, as if the station itself were alive and breathing. Each flicker cast distorted shadows across the platform, making it impossible to tell whether something or someone was lurking just beyond the reach of their beams. "What the hell is going on?" Emma demanded, her bravado faltering. Before anyone could respond, they heard it. The unmistakable rumble of an approaching train. "But there aren't supposed to be any trains running here," Mia stammered, clutching Daniel's arm. "It must be a freight train or something," Jake suggested weakly, though he sounded far from convinced. The rumbling grew louder, accompanied by the piercing screech of metal grinding against metal. And then, emerging from the darkness, came the train itself. Its headlights cut through the gloom, blinding them momentarily. When their vision adjusted, they realized something was wrong. The train looked ancient, its paint chipped and faded, its windows clouded with grime. It moved impossibly slowly, as though struggling to stay on the tracks. As it drew closer, the group noticed another detail that sent shivers down their spines. Every single window was dark. No passengers sat inside, no conductor waved from the caboose. It was completely empty, or so it seemed. Okay, Olivia said quickly, backing away. "We need to go. Now." "No arguments here," Jake agreed, already heading back toward the station. But before they could retreat, the train came to a halt directly in front of them. The doors slid open with a deafening hiss, revealing the interior bathed in shadow. From within, they heard a soft melodic whisper that seemed to echo in their minds rather than their ears. "Come aboard!" it urged, gentle yet insistent. None of them moved. They stood rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a mix of fear and curiosity. "Don't listen to it," Emma shouted, snapping them out of their trance. "Whatever you do, don't get on that train." Her words seemed to break the spell. One by one, they turned and ran, fleeing back toward the safety of the station. But as they reached the entrance, they realized something was terribly wrong. The building they had entered earlier was gone. In its place stood a vast expanse of wilderness, stretching endlessly in every direction. Panic set in as they frantically searched for a way out, but the forest seemed to shift and change around them, trapping them in an endless maze. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time had lost all meaning. Eventually, exhaustion forced them to stop, collapsing onto the damp earth beneath the skeletal branches of towering trees. And that's when they saw it again, the train, waiting silently on invisible tracks. One by one, they began to disappear. First, it was Jake, who wandered off alone in search of help. Then Mia, lured away by the promise of finding shelter. Next came Olivia, driven mad by the constant whispers she swore only she could hear. Finally, Daniel succumbed to despair, convinced he would find answers aboard the train. Only Emma remained, clinging to the hope that she could escape whatever malevolent force had ensnared her friends. But as dawn broke over the horizon, casting pale light across the desolate landscape, she found herself standing on the platform once more. The train loomed before her, its doors wide open, inviting her to step inside. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the truth. She would never leave. Like the others, she was destined to become one of the last passengers, the ones who never got off. The forest fell silent again, save for the faint rustle of leaves and the distant hum of crickets. Somewhere near the edge of the woods, the old train station stood abandoned, its wooden structure warped and weathered by time. Paint peeled off the sign that once proudly announced Millbrook Station, now barely legible under layers of grime and neglect. Few people ventured here anymore, except for curious teenagers daring each other to explore its haunted history, or so the rumors went. They said the house was empty. The small town of Ridgewood, nestled deep in the heart of New England, had always been a place where whispers carried farther than voices. It was late autumn, and the air was crisp with the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth. The sun was setting behind the jagged tree line, casting long shadows over the quiet streets. A young woman named Emily Carter had just returned to her hometown after years of living in the city. She had come back for one reason: to settle the estate of her late uncle, a man she barely remembered from her childhood. Emily parked her car in front of the old house on Maplewood Lane, its peeling paint and sagging porch giving it an air of abandonment. She stepped out of the car, her boots crunching